So we are recording.
So if we're all ready to get started, firstly, welcome to tonight's session as part of the Real Farming Conference. We've got two speakers tonight. We've got James Anderson Bickley and also Chris Utley. Our first speaker tonight is going to be James Anderson Bickley, who is in the partnership advisor on natural flood management and woodland creation to the Forestry Commission, and that's for the North West and for the West Midlands. So over to you, James.
Okay, thank you, Louisa. I'm just going to try and share my screen. Get the technology to work for us. I'm a bit new to video conferencing, so
It's okay, it's not come up yet, but
how's that?
Not yet, but there seems to be a bit of a delay on your line, so it might just take a moment. That's
okay.
Good. I can see it now.
Okay.
Great.
And I'm just wondering if I can do anything to speed that up. I've been in woodlands and forestry for over 30 years now. I left school at 16, that's my granddad. I left school at 16 and after a few jobs went to work in the woods. And then after over 10 years of that, I went back to education and I've been working now for the Forestry Commission for about 20 years. Louisa said I cover partnership work in the West Midlands and the Northwest. I was specifically working on natural flood management for about 4 years, and but now my work in line with government's intentions to significantly increase woodland cover in the UK by 50,000 hectares over the period leading up to the period of next Parliament a year, 50,000 hectares a year, is a major priority for us. And the reason for that is largely around carbon. And in the UK, we've massively reduced our woodland area. So we're one of the lowest areas for woodland cover in Europe. And these figures have recently changed. We've gone up to about 13%. The latest statistics are showing us. And that loss is goes way back, but it increased up from about the Doomsday Book period to 100 years ago. In the last 100 years, we've planted or increased our woodland cover by about 5%. And there's the Southeast has historically had significant woodland cover, but most of that increase has been in Wales and Scotland. I can't recall if Louise said, but will we take questions at the end, will we?
Yeah, I think so.
So there are many reasons for planting woodlands, and okay, yeah, thanks Andy. And I wanted to look at sort of woodland creation and why plant trees and woodlands, and then move on to natural flood management. And I've a dozen or more slides here to run through with you. And I suspect it's been covered in other presentations in this conference, but shelter is really important. And often when we've planted shelter belts in the past, it's primarily been about sheltering stock in from winter conditions and stopping sheep and stock loss, particularly during bad winters. But also the photo there was taken a couple of years ago during the drought, and I'm not sure if you recall, but when the temperatures in the north were starting to hit up to 30 degrees C and possibly even higher on some days, the stock would know where they want to be, and you could often see sheep and cows under trees. And there was a piece of work done in Wales a few years ago looking at increase in live weight from sheltered sheep, increase in dairy milk production, and increase in pasture growth. So there's a great relationship there with trees on farms. And also for timber, we can provide different revenue streams for farms and landowners and landholders with timber and forest products. And here are people doing it too, which I thought was a lovely slide, because you've got the animals doing it and now we're doing it. Okay. And woodlands are a wonderful resource for species conservation and biodiversity, and incredibly rich habitats woodlands provide. Introductions of missing species like pine marten in the Forest of Dean in the last year or so, beaver in riparian woodlands increasingly in England now, having started off in Knapdale and the River Tay catchment. And I've been working closely with butterfly conservation and on Lepidoptera conservation in the northwest, particularly the Morecambe Bay area, which is famous for its high brown fritillary and a number of fritillary species. And in fact, there's a stronghold left in the UK. And so when we're thinking about carbon and the ability of woodlands to lock up that carbon, if we increased our woodland cover to 16%, we could abate 10% of the UK's CO2 emissions, and correspondingly, if we went higher than that, we could increase beyond that too. In the north of England, we think there's over 2,500 people primarily employed with their primary employment in woodlands, and the UK figures between 50 and 60,000 people work at haulage and that sort of thing. And when we are the second largest importer of timber and timber products in the world after China, and that represents a net loss of £8 billion, £8 to £9 billion per year, and that's been consistent for probably about the last 5 years, if not longer, against our UK balance of trade. And the UK forest standards, the UK is has a highly regulated forestry sector. So with licensing around felling trees and restocking, replanting. So when we import timber, we can export the environmental costs, and we don't necessarily know whether that timber comes from sustainable sources that we bring in. So I met with folks at Small World Consulting about a year ago, this time, November last year, and Small World Consulting are a leader in carbon accounting for businesses, and they work with a lot of corporates, and they look at their carbon footprint and look at different ways of reducing their carbon footprint. And their main emphasis is on bringing their carbon down and reducing that carbon footprint. It gets to a stage where they can't take it any further, and they're looking at their scope 1, 2, and 3 carbon emissions associated with their businesses. So Brewdog approached Small World Consulting, and they helped them with their carbon emissions. And Brewdog, one of the first to go carbon negative, and with some pretty aggressive marketing here, but along with Patagonia and Microsoft, and they're saying that some of these companies are just leaving it too late, or Brewdog are saying that, not Small World Consulting. So they're saying for every can of their beer you drink, they will sequester an additional can worth of carbon emissions. So one of the ways they're doing this is through planting woodlands. And One World Consulting were primarily interested in reduction, but as that's so difficult, they looked at how they could how they could sequester that carbon. And with Vicky West, Dr. Vicky West from Forest Research, we had a really positive meeting, and the offshoot of that was that they are looking at planting a forest, or they're starting to now, and they're also working. I'm just checking. No, it's not on my next slide. They're also working with the Woodland Trust and Rivers Trust in the northwest to put trees in the ground and lock up that carbon, and hopefully more companies will follow them, and they are. And in the UK, they're using the Woodland Carbon Code, and which is an auditable trail. And because Brewdog also brew beer in Australia and America, they're working similar partnerships there. But they've been unsuccessful with their German operations, where they brew in Germany to date. I want to move on to thinking about water now. And this is work from the Ribble catchment, where it was initiated about 10 years ago with Keeping Rivers Cool, which was an excellent Environment Agency funded program to put trees over rivers to, in effect, regulate river temperature. And with climate change, we know that river temperature's increasing. When the river temperature goes over 20 for a period of time, then salmonids start to die, and there are critical thresholds for limits on mortality, or when that mortality starts happening. And the salmonids are like the canary in the coal mine for aquatic life. This graph here was this work was done about 2 years ago, and it showed that for a consistent period of time through July, August, the water temperature is really high. Now we know the blue line shows where river stretches were running through woodlands and had tree shade, and it was consistently keeping the water temperature 5 degrees cooler or more. Whereas on the open hill or open sections of river, the river temperature followed the ambient or air temperature, and was consistently quite high, and causing climate change related problems now here in the northwest that can be reduced with woodlands. So the next slide, I want to start looking at natural flood management. And we've long known that the way we manage land has an impact on the way the watershed or the catchment, the movement of water through that catchment. And in 1899, 130 years ago, Watson was writing about the River Kent and said, like most rivers, it is affected by the increasing drainage of land over its watershed. And the more effective systems of drainage is now so thorough and so general, within a few hours of heavy rain, the surface water has run off the land and entered the river, with the effect that the latter rises and falls with astonishing rapidity. Before the system of drainage became so general, the rainwater had to percolate slowly through the land, with the result that a day's heavy rain might not find its way into the river for a week. And then he goes on to talk about flooding downstream. So with natural flood management, in target areas, we want to hold water back on the land. Traditionally, when we've thought about hydrology and how we manage floods, we've looked at, I can't use a pointer but on the screen here, well, maybe I can, and I've not discovered how to do that yet, but that's
I
increasing.
think you can just move your mouse along it.
Oh, I don't have a mouse. Oh, yes, I do. Sorry. So here we have the river at the bottom of the hill, and typically we'd look at conveyance, increasing that flow of water through towns, and that's the way we've managed floods, so we can get more water out quicker. With natural flood management, we want to look higher up the catchment and hold that water back on the land. So traditional flood engineers have looked at conveyance. We want to manipulate the time it takes for that water from hitting the ground to reaching the town, and also or the homes or the community at flood risk, and also the volume. We want to manipulate the volume of water and when that's doing that. So we know, and this is well understood science, that if you've got bare ground, a lot of tarmac, a lot of hard ground, then that flood peak goes right up and then starts dropping down again. The more vegetated a landscape is, the more forest we have in a landscape, we soften that peak, and we can stretch that peak out and flatten it, or that's what we're seeking to do. And there's a number of means of doing that. There's just some text at the top of the slide there. Non-stationary flood frequency, increasingly, and particularly in the northwest, we found that the flood frequency is increasing. We're having more floods with bigger floods, greater frequency, and we believe this is a climate change impact. And climate change, the UK prediction is for a 20 to 40% increase in rainfall events. So the key points which guide me are that for the NFN to be most effective is in small catchments above a community at flood risk. And this is some work we did with leading forest hydrologist Tom Nisbet. Now, the evidence, the hard evidence, is largely derived from smaller catchments because it's easier to get into a smaller catchment and monitor it. The logic dictates that actually NFM should work in medium and large size catchments, but largely because of reasons of cost, we don't so far carry out NFM in large catchments. So 100 kilometers squared, 200 kilometers squared is probably about where we would pitch it. And the smaller the catchment, the easier it is to afford. And we'll move on to funding later, but the funding for NFM is really challenging. How do we, at the moment, it's pretty piecemeal. We've got various grant mechanisms at the moment to pay for things, but the grants are hard to access, and the funding, amount of funding available, is quite hard to evidence enough change at a big enough scale, and it would be great to access more funding. Then the other watchword for me really is that large-scale interventions are required to make a significant difference. So the more natural flood management measures you can put into a catchment, the greater you can reduce that flood peak. So in terms of woodlands, and I'm going to slightly detour beyond woodlands towards the end of this presentation. There are four main mechanisms by which woodlands work. The first is wet canopy evaporation or interception of clouds and rain as it comes across the landscape. The second is soil protection, and we also have higher rates of infiltration in forest soils or woodland soils, and hydraulic roughness of floodplains and riparian woodlands. And then finally, I'd like to touch on physical barriers and leaky dams. So increasing water use and reducing flood volume. The graph there shows annual, it's largely derived from annual data. In fact, it's entirely derived from annual data. And underpinning that chart, there's about 50 studies taken in temperate woodlands and forests, most of them European actually, and show that trees can evaporate up to 30 to 40% for conifers and 10 to 20% for broadleaves. That's annualized data. It's really hard to come by daily data. There's only a few studies that really look at daily rainfall and storm events. And digging back through hard data generated from the 50s, there was a study in Lancashire at Stocks Reservoir that was showing that on a daily basis, during storm events of 8 centimeters rain, which is enough to put rivers out of bank and cause flooding, up to 30% of that rainfall during a storm event wasn't actually reaching the forest floor. So where was that water going? Back up. And the method it works, so you've got the interception loss and the transpiration loss. And you can literally see this occurring if you drive past a forest. Storms come in pulses across a landscape, and so you'll have some high intensity rainfall, and then it will subside. And when that humidity reduces, that air humidity reduces, then greater transpiration, inception loss occurs. And this is often more frequent on a leeward side of a hill. And that's frequently where we see it, but you can literally see it happening when you see clouds lifting off forests during rainy, wet weather. So, and this is an extreme example. This was this photograph was taken shortly after Storm Desmond. The second method is literally trees can help that material, that sediment, stay on the land, and these trees here literally stopped those boulders reaching that watercourse, so that can maintain conveyance at a level that is sustainable. So the tree cover helps stabilize riverbanks, reducing sedimentation. And I've seen there's some work done by Robert Palmer, I think, who was with Cranfield. He did a soil survey across the UK, but he looked at landslides post-Storm Desmond and found that these were occurring where you had rock bars on the hillsides, and you would often get water coming out of these, but the water would sheet down through the hillside, through the glacial till, and when it hit this rock bar, it would push out, literally explode out, and then send a landslide down the hill. And if one of the ways of stabilizing those and stopping that from actually happening is to plant around those. So we want to keep that material, that soil, on the hills and on the land. The third method is trees will and shrubs and woody cover will increase soil porosity from between 15 and 55%, and this increases the soil's ability to store water. This is really important during flash flood events in the summer, but also in the winter when the soil is able to discharge. Then there's capacity to recharge itself. There's more volume storage there. Often poorly structured soils, which will their capacity and their ability to discharge and recharge is reduced during successive winter storm events, but a more greater variety in the soil structure supported by trees is it helps that. And then physical barriers. This was a piece of work done by Mannings. It's really old. It was done in an old study done in 1959. But it's current and it's still true. And it helps us understand the passage of water across a floodplain and how it will be held back by vegetation. So unsurprisingly, short grass, high grass doesn't have much resistance. But then as we move down, we look at land with stumps, and then shrubs, and the denser types of vegetation that you can have. And understandably, that physically will slow the movement down. And it's been quantified here by Mannings back in 1959. Still holds true. Excellent piece of work. So I want to talk more about physical interception and holding water in the landscape. We've been using what we call kested hedgerows, or establishing kested hedgerows. These ones are more like Devon hedges, pretty large banks to intercept pluvial or surface water flows at strategic points on the land. And this example here is from West Cumbria. Just behind the chap there in the photo, there's a terrace of houses that regularly flooded, and the farmer agreed to put that on his land. There's a small pipe restriction in it in a couple of places that allows that water behind to run off over the course of 10 hours, 6 to 10 hours. So the farmer can still farm his land, the community gets flood protection, and we can plant some hedgerows and trees in there as well. So that's a really good result for the environment and the community and the farmer. And here are some more examples. There's a large woody Bunds structure from Pickering there, and that there's 2 of those at Pickering, and that one there I think holds about 2,500 cubic meters of water. There's a larger one that holds about 5,000 cubic meters of water, and that was instrumental in reducing the flood peak in Pickering, I think in 2018. Chris will probably tell me I'm wrong, or correct me on the date there, but that reduced the flood peak by 8%, and helped the community in Pickering, along with 156 leaky dams, smaller structures. And there's another one from the northeast, Belford, I think it is, and I think that one in the right corner holds back about 500 cubic meters. And in the bottom right corner, we've got the sort of polypropylene pipes that we can use to control that release of water. So that's a sort of halfway house between, or that's that. Natural flood management is like a spectrum. On the one hand, you've got peat bog restoration, wildflower restoration that can store more water, and then you've got interventions like bunded water storage, small scale storage in the landscape. And here's an assessment of a site for that, and we've looked at aerial photographs, we've looked at LiDAR, and the structure in the top right was a track with a slow constriction pipe in it. So the farmer got a track out of it, and we've got, I think, 5,000 cubic meters of water storage. And here's some leaky woody dam structures. You've got built structures there, and then some more organic type structures, but they all serve to hold water in the land, or hold water back, intercept those flows, put water out of bank, and keep it there until that storm has passed. And they will typically hold between 100 to 2, possibly 300 cubic meters of water. The one in the bottom left won't hold as much, but again, it serves as built-in chains of 5-10 structures we can hold water back. Monitoring is really important, and this is working with Nick Chappell from Lancaster, and we put a series of flumes in across the northwest, particularly in Cumbria, to measure the effectiveness of these interventions, natural flood management interventions. And this one here serves a double purpose. A community downstream of this is Grange over Sands. They're a frequently flooding community, and the Grange over Sands is in a karstic or limestone catchment. So this well here is literally a trickle most of the time. It's actually dry for many months in a year, and then it literally explodes. And you'll have several meters a second, cubic meters a second of water from this site and another hole in the hillside that cause a dozen homes to flood. And when we come back to thinking about climate change, those homes were flooding, or Windermere eroded Grange would experience flooding maybe once every 10 years or less. Now, in the last 5 years or so, they're flooding pretty much every year. But we're able to give them an early warning that the flood's on its way, and it also helps us direct our management operations to reduce that flooding on the land. It's really important to understand where the mechanisms of flooding and how that flooding occurs when we're looking at landscapes. And here's a look at surface water flood maps from the Environment Agency, and trying to understand how that water moves across the land. And I hope you can see, but you can see faint blue on running over these fields here. See if I can highlight it with my mouse there. And so we would want to hold that water and put bunds in these places and intercept that water in these places, hitting these surface water flows. But really key is going to talk to those farmers and having really good conversations and being able to give those farmers a meaningful offer. If they're going to give up their land and have that land flood for periods of time in a year, then it's really important to build really good relationships. And they know, without even looking at these maps, where the water is running and where it's holding on their land. And the other interesting place to look is flood investigation reports that are carried out by lead local flood authorities or local authority. And that helps us design our interventions. And this is Flimby, a community in West Cumbria, where in 2015, I think about 100 to 80 homes were flooded. And we worked with West Cumbria Rivers Trust. We secured some funding, and right now that program is approaching completion. And they've put, this was an initial concept plan. Conversations were had with the farmers and landowners, and then a lot of leaky woody structures were put into the forest, onto the land, and a number of bunded storage features like the ones we previously looked at were put in place. Now, coming back to thinking about scale, the Lune catchment, which I'm fairly familiar with, is about 1,000 kilometers squared, and the Conda catchment, it just sits in the bottom left corner there of the Lune, below the main Lune catchment, and it's about just shy of 40 kilometers squared. In Lancaster, about 70 homes flooded during Storm Desmond, and in the Conda catchment in Gallgate, 100 homes flooded. There's 48 kilometers square of woodland in the Lune catchment, 2.8 kilometers squared of woodland in the Conda catchment, so or representing 4.7% or 7.5% respectively. So to uplift that woodland area to 30%, and around 30%, we know we're going to start seeing a significant impact on flooding in a catchment. We know we're going to start detecting that reduction in those hydrograph peaks. To do that in the Lune would cost about £290 million for Lancaster. To do that for Gallgate would cost about £7 million. It's achievable over a period in the Conda catchment, but for the whole of the Lune for Lancaster, that's a big ask. That's not to say that there aren't communities within the Lune catchment that absolutely should have natural flood management, and we work closely with Tebay right at the top of the Lune catchment, and there's a program of natural flood management that's going in there now, and Rod, who I think is on the call, can tell us about flooding in his local area, which is being addressed with NFM. And although I'm not sure if that flooded in Desmond, but certainly there are a number of communities within or sub-catchments within the Lune catchment that would benefit. But when we're trying to allocate resources, it's really important to try and think about scale and think what we can achieve, and rather than try and bite off the whole of a really big catchment, is try and evidence it in smaller places first. Excuse me, paying for it. At the moment, we've got some pretty blunt tools. They're pretty bulky and difficult to use, but we can pay up to £6,800 a hectare to plant woodland. We can pay £200 a hectare maintenance for 15 years, I believe, at the moment, and also retain £200 a hectare basic payment until those cap payments stop, which I think is in 2027. Leaky dams at the moment, I think we're paying through Countryside Stewardship £764 for a large dam, £461 for a smaller dam. And so those are some main funding routes we can look at. But if, again, scale is a really interesting one, because there's quite a lot of processes, you would imagine, trying to access that funding. So it's really important that if you're to think about scale, and that really becomes worthwhile if you're spending 2 days form filling and having conversations with the Rural Payments Agency. If you can either brigade schemes together, so River Rivers Trust particularly effective in bringing, they're planting about 50 hectares, 60 hectares a year, but they will do a whole batch in one go. And Woodland Carbon Fund is another method of paying for woodland creation. There's also Carbon Guarantee, which is a reverse auction. I think we're in our second, possibly third round now, where if you're planting a woodland, you can register it with the carbon code, and you can then reverse auction, sell those carbon units back to Treasury in effect, or back to the government, and that is helping to support and underpin the early carbon markets, and carbon's trading at between £10 and £20, or woodland carbon is at the moment. We also have the Woodland Creation Planning Grant. That's £1,000 fixed payment, and then £100 a hectare, to up to a maximum of £30,000 to plan a woodland, to make sure that's a sustainable woodland. And you're going through all the necessary consultation with neighbours, looking at all the potential biodiversity designations, and really making sure that the woodland fulfills a number of purposes and is a great woodland. I think that's really about all I wanted to cover in the slides, and I'm really happy to take questions, or I'm happy to go back and pick up on areas in greater depth. But I just wanted to give an introductory overview. Yeah,
that's fantastic. Thank you ever so much, James. So I think the best idea is if people could have a think about any questions, if you want to pop those into the chat, and then at the end of Chris's presentation, which is coming next, we could maybe have a wrap up session and take some questions and answers at the end, if that's okay for everybody. So I will move next into Chris's presentation. So next we have Chris Utley, who's the Senior Advisor for Flood and Coastal Risk Management at the Environment Agency. Chris has worked in countryside and conservation management for most of his career, but recently spent 4 years with Stroud District Council working with farmers, landowners and communities to implement natural flood management in the catchments of Stroud Frome. And now he obviously works as a Senior Flood and Coastal Advisor with the EA, specialising in nature-based solutions and integrating the management of the environment into flood and coastal risk management. So if I can pass over to Chris, and then if people want to fire any questions either for Chris or James through the chat, we can have a look at those once Chris has done his presentation. That'd be fantastic. Thank you. Over to Chris.
All right, thanks, Louisa. I'll just share my screen if it gets going. Okay, is someone let me know that that's going?
Yeah, that looks great. That's all good, Chris.
Okay, so as Louisa said, I'm working the team in the Environment Agency that specialises in natural flood management and nature-based solutions. I've been there for a couple of years, but spent 4 years on the ground working with farmers and landowners to implement the stuff before moving into the EA. And now I'm leading our flood risk input into the development of elms, which is what I'm going to talk to you about today. But before I move on to elms, I thought I'd just introduce a friend of mine, Adam Horowitz. He is a poet from Stroud and spent 4 years as poet in residence with the Pasture Fed Livestock Association, who are also based in Stroud, incidentally. And he's got an anthology of poems he created when he was with the farms. But this one here, I think, has a good lesson for us all, which is that too much fact runs off busy people like water from compacted soil. Learn how to open them to the seeds of ideas, or water them with stories and watch them grow. And the beauty of natural flood management to me is it sets the scene for telling this fantastic story about the interaction of land management, food, farming, what's on our plates, and ultimately what might end up in our kitchens in the shape of a flood. And there are kind of fewer, better narratives and stories that I can think of that provide that really strong link between how we farm, how we manage our land, and the consequences for us as a society in terms of flooding, but also in terms of other aspects of our well-being. And what I wanted to do was to kind of use his ethos of telling a story first to kind of give a little bit of an overview, although James has done that already, about natural flood management, but then how that fits into elms and what we're working on to make sure that elms can provide as much benefit to reduce flood risk and achieve all those other environmental outcomes as we'd like. So just some key elements of the natural flood management story then. To remember, it is a catchment-wide approach. So you cannot solve flooding with actions in a single wood or a single farm. It's the cumulative benefit of all those interventions together that deliver the outcomes. It's worth remembering that although we get our funding in kind of projects and packages, it's not really a project. It is just a long-term form of land and watercourse management that we will never need to stop. You don't finish a natural flow management project. It will just continue in the same way that we continue to farm and steward the land, and in the same way that we do all our activities. It needs constant upgrading, constant maintenance. It's a long-term thing. Third thing is that it is about the people, and it's about these sorts of people, the farmers, the woodland owners and the contractors, but also it's about the people that are having the natural flood management done to them. And obviously, usually that's in the shape of flood action groups, but flood risk probably uniquely amongst lots of other kind of environmental things that we look to ELMS to deliver is uniquely political. And so local residents who are flooded often turn to their local councillors, local MPs who get involved. And so it becomes quite a political issue. And so we have to kind of accept that and work with those institutions and those processes, parish councils, local authorities, and central government as we take this forward. And that will be exactly the same for natural flood management as it is for all aspects of flood management. I'm a great advocate of not overcomplicating natural flood management. I think we're sometimes in danger of making it seem like it's extremely complicated. You need a PhD in hydrology in order to understand the stuff. There are some simplistic ways of thinking about it, and I tend to use this, my kitchen funnel, when I'm trying to describe what we're trying to achieve. And a pint of water or a pint of beer poured through a kitchen funnel at speed and then slower generally gives people the idea of what we're trying to achieve. And I think not overcomplicating it, and importantly, using and respecting local knowledge and experience to make our work accessible. So we're not using language that seems to be exclusive. And the more we can involve people who are not professionals, the better from my point of view. So just a few elements of the kind of natural flood management story there. And the thing to bear in mind is that the most effective natural flood management structure ever built is this one. A bit cheesy, I know, but forming relationships and strong relationships with communities and farmers and landowners is really at the heart of everything that we need to do. And it's unsuccessful natural flood management projects that forget that it's about forging partnerships and relationships alongside the technical aspects. So I know James touched on this, and I'll just re-emphasize some of the evidence for how natural flood management works, or what it's best at. And James was right. We know that it works best for what we might call low magnitude, high frequency floods. So smaller floods, muddy and surface flow floods, and it works. It does work better in smaller catchments, and the reason for that, as James alluded to, is that it's just proportionally easier to intervene in the right sort of flows at the right scale in a smaller catchment than it is in a big one. It's that straightforward. So it's a question of scale and cost. No one's put in enough work into a massive catchment for us to be able to measure or observe. But at the moment, we know that we can make a big difference in smaller operational catchments for those smaller flood events. I would just add, though, that is what we might traditionally call the natural flood management end. Floodplain restoration and storage are absolutely kind of smack bang in the middle of flood reduction techniques. And we've got extremely strong evidence that storing water in large quantities and restoring floodplain connection reduces bigger magnitude events and will work in larger catchments and populations, but clearly comes with more societal costs. We know that coastal realignments work extremely well at tackling coastal erosion and flooding, and sand dunes and salt marshes, etc., are recognised by coastal defence engineers as part of our asset portfolio. So they're really important parts of flood defences. And if you look at the most common form of coastal defence around the country, I think it will be cliff, followed by beach, and various forms of natural systems well before you get into concrete or other sorts of coastal defences. So how does it work? I think I'm probably talking to people who understand this stuff. It is about roughness, it's about infiltration and evapotranspiration and storage. And if you think about the actions we need to give effect to those hydrological effects, it's pretty much everything that we might want to do on land. But I've found in thinking about natural flood management, and certainly when we've been looking at elms, it can be a complicated picture, and we tend to kind of think about a hodgepodge of actions and activities, and we call it all natural flood management, and it certainly affects hydrology. But for reasons that will hopefully become obvious, I find it's much easier to think about them in four broad categories. The first one, and arguably the most important, is habitat creation or restoration. It's these large-scale changes to land use to create or restore habitats that will increase roughness. So rewilding projects, tree planting, woodland creation, big-scale peatland restoration projects, and including these fellas. So there will be elements of payments within elms, because the ministers have asked for this to be the case, that will allow facilitate beaver reintroduction. So it won't be payments for beavers themselves, because that would be a bit silly, be like payments for foxes or otters. But the habitat and landscape effects that beavers create will certainly be part of the kind of portfolio of things which elms will fund. So the first package is this kind of big scale land use change, habitat creation. The second package it's worth thinking about is what we might just call farming. So changes to farming practice and land management that will change infiltration and reduce erosion. And these are at the core, these are your what you might call your bog standard activities that elms and countryside stewardship and other things have paid for. Really hard to get flood money to do anything with this sort of stuff, but we know that it's incredibly important at scale to think about infiltration and better soil health. And this is really where you get to the core of that kind of connection between what's on your plate and how much water might end up in your kitchen. Because if we've got large areas of compacted soils through poor management, we know we're highly likely, literally, to get that through the kitchen door in some places. So really important part of elms. There's lots of different systems in place, of course. Pasture-fed livestock, as I've already alluded to, regenerative agriculture, organic farming, lots of ways to test soil health. And these are all going to be kind of important parts of what elms will try to do. I'm not suggesting it will go to these certification systems itself, but many of the activities that the certification systems require, I think, will be finding their way into elms. The third package of stuff that we've been advising on is what everybody calls natural flood management. It's this small scale changes in topography or landscape that can change hydrology and flows when you apply them across large areas of land. So our old friends, the leaky woody dams, leaky barriers, dry ponds, earth ponds. That there's a massive range of these things, and there's a piece of interesting work just been done by ourselves with the Forestry Commission on 3D buffers, basically planting trees next to streams, to you and me. 3D buffers, we've discovered, actually are one of the most effective ways of slowing flows, providing that hydraulic roughness along stream sides. Some other examples of the types of leaky woody structures that we've been working on, and I've been helping to put together the technical guidance for what leaky woody structures should look like within elms, and the sorts of criteria that we want to see. We've used a risk assessment document, which ourselves and the Forestry Commission worked on last year to form the basis of that type of technical guidance. And these are some of the principles. So in many parts of the country, high attenuation and storage is key, but lots of leaky woody structures, one of their main benefits is really this hydraulic roughness. It's adding that roughness to channels, to floodplains, and creating a diversity of flow. And what we want to see as a principle is structures performing a wide variety of roles within the environment, some of which are there primarily about attenuation, some of which are providing roughness, some of which are changing the bed form of small watercourses and streams, and adding to the habitat diversity of streams. So we've drafted the guidance to accommodate a wide range of different structures and different designs, all of which informed by principles of risk assessment and safety. And these are some of the kind of larger, wilder structures that we might want to get at the kind of far end of the habitat side. And James had photographs of the ones that we might want to see at the more structured end. And then so the final kind of package of work that we've got within elms are these kind of large scale systems that require some significant engineering. So coastal realignments, floodplain connection, and restoration. And these do need some significant capital input, and often that can be found from flood granting aid. But elms is going to be really key to manage the land within inside these big re-engineered areas. So you see there the photograph on the right. It's a significant area of land, and whoever owns that land, if it's retained by the farmer or the original landowner, will need to secure agreements with the elms to farm it in a completely different way to the original practice and land management regime it was under. And you might want to think of these as a bit of a hierarchy. So you arrive on some land. First of all, you look at the potential for habitat. Then you think about changes to farming practice and land management. What can you get out of working on the factory floor, so to speak? Then you think about the easier stuff. And in many respects, it is the easier stuff because it's off the factory floor, it's in marginal areas, these minor capital NFM works. And then maybe there might be potential for some of these larger scale quasi semi-engineered projects that require this big injection of capital. Elms, for those of you who saw the policy discussion documents, the proposal is it will be within 3 tiers, and each of those tiers we envisage will make a contribution to NFM and flood risk. So tier 1 might be a universal part of the scheme, which is available everywhere, and you could see that soil protection, soil management, basic resource protection might be the key focus and the way we get the contribution to reducing surface flows. Tier 2 is where most of the action will be for flood management and natural flood management, and that's where we'd be looking for capital payments, management payments for leaky woody structures, these kind of capital changes to land and topography. And then tier 3 is where the focus will be for these larger scale landscape scale land use changes, but that we don't require significant engineering. So woodland creation and some of the peatland restoration or rewilding type projects that might come forward. So this 3-tier system, and each of them will make a contribution. An important part of making sure ELMS does the job for flood risk is making sure the work is targeted in the right places. So we've been working on a spatial prioritization system, it's called. So the ELMS has ditched the word targeting and is focused on something called spatial prioritization. To us, that is just making sure work happens where it's needed or where we get the most public good. And we've moved away from some of the opportunity mapping that people might have seen, NFM opportunity mapping, which is great for looking at where you could do natural flood management, but it's not so good at finding out where we need natural flood management to reduce risk. And so we've devised a sort of a simplistic tool that allows us to focus in on places where we've got large numbers of properties in these smaller rural catchments. And the map you can see here is Yorkshire, and you can see the kind of red and orange areas are in these kind of Pennine, West Yorkshire and South Yorkshire population areas, steeper catchments flowing off the Pennines, largely rural, but with tens of thousands of houses at flood risk. And then in the middle of Yorkshire, massive opportunity to do natural flood management around Ripon, but very few properties for the size of the catchment that you've got to work in. So maybe not the best place to start building leaky woody structures. However, just the caveat to that is, of course, the reverse might be true if we want to focus on floodplain storage. And so we want to make sure there's enough flexibility within the targeting system so we can look at where NFM would do the job, where floodplain storage and restoration would also provide benefits, where coastal habitat and coastal realignment might be the tool of choice, but also in lower lying areas. So I know there aren't a great deal of those in the place where the conference has been focused, but water level management, large scale internal drainage boards in the Fens and East Anglia, and of course, lots of interesting issues there around land management, food production, and water level management in these highly managed landscapes that require drainage and pumping. So we want to think about how we might focus work of a particular type within those areas. So looking at effectively 4 different sorts of spatial or targeting work, all about flood risk, but focused on these kind of broad outcomes that we want to see. Back to our farmers and landowners, training and advice and guidance would be a really important part of that. So we know that there'll be a need for specialized advisors, generalist advisors, and so we're involved in some of the discussions around how those will be trained, who will be providing advice, will we need specialist bespoke advice for complex construction jobs? Will generalist advisors be able to be trained up to give broad scale NFM advice? So we don't know yet. There's a lot of work going on in that area, and I think a lot of that is only just getting going. Thinking about how will the payments be associated? Well, none of this is we're not very involved in this type of area, but we're getting questions about whether payments should be linked to flood reduction. Should payments be linked to the contribution each farmer makes to reduction in flood risk? Well, our advice to that is absolutely not, because that would make the mistake of thinking that every individual leaky dam and every individual field is somehow able to be modelled as making a contribution to risk. What we want to promote is the idea that flood risk is reduced by the collective action of the cumulative effect of lots of individual farmers, lots of individual landowners doing as much or as little work as they can manage or want to take part in, but all cumulatively adding together to create the reduction in risk. So we might want to link payments just simply to things like area of roughness, area of infiltration, or things like how much water you're storing, on top of course, the capital payments that you would receive for doing the work in the first place, on top of maintenance and management. So what ELMS provides us with the opportunity to do, which lots of individual project funding for natural flood management hasn't, is make this kind of ongoing management and maintenance of the things that are built a key part of the scheme. And this is something that's a really important part of what we're advising into DEFRA in the development of the scheme. So brings me to an end. I'll leave you with another poet who I quite like, another farmer, Wendell Berry, an American guy who talks about the old ways of managing land and how the linkage between land and water management is really important. And I think natural flood management, as I said, is one of those work areas which I think provides some genuine, we can be genuinely optimistic about, and that it's one of these subjects where I think we can make a huge difference to people's health and well-being, but at the same time as restoring nature, storing carbon, and improving water quality and air quality. So it provides this kind of fantastic way of achieving all these environmental outcomes, but with this really solid link to an easily measured public good. There we are.
That's fantastic. Thank you ever so much, Chris. Really interesting. Lots of stuff that I've gleaned from that, actually. So we've now got time for a bit of a wrap-up session. If anybody's got any questions that they'd like to ask either Chris, James, or myself about natural flood management or woodlands, looking at reducing flooding or from a farming perspective. I haven't seen anything coming through on the chat, but then I'm having a few technical challenges with my chat. So
there was one from me, but I'm happy to wait for others to have a go first, to have a think about a question.
There's not many people, Andy, are there? So we could do it just through talking rather than
that might be
having to go through questions. Yeah,
I'm all in favour of talking.
So
radical.
Because yeah, it's a nice small group. If people want to, are happy to unmute and let me know if they have a question. We can field those across to either James or Chris. So Mark, you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question to James. I've been making biochar for quite a while, mainly out of hardwood stuff, and I've started discussions at Kilda until lockdown came in as to whether it's an idea that we maybe char the spruce and then put that back on the soil, partly for water retention, but also it'll obviously help hold nutrients and stop wind erosion. And I'm just wondering if it's anything you've come across at all and whether it's worth having a conversation at your level with it.
So James, over to you. You're muted currently.
There, just trying to work out how to unmute myself. I bet your conversations about trying to turn spruce into char with Kilda went down like a lead balloon.
With who?
With Kilda, I don't imagine they're very keen on turning their spruce into char.
Well, only the brushwood, not the actual timber, okay. Just the top, I mean, the chip price is still very high at the moment, so we are fighting a bit. I mean, yeah. Jenkinsons and stuff are bundling, but I imagine that, you know, if we're looking at improving the quality of the land, so I'm on the FWAC and chatting through with the chair about it, and Kevin May is supposed to be having a meeting with us, but we're still on sort of various levels of lockdown. But I just wondered if you come across it at all as anybody using it anywhere, looking at the way it's dealing with Sitka brash, basically.
I think I've read about char. It's in terms of carbon storage. I think it was with James Lovelock's stuff. I can't remember. I don't know a great deal about char, other than offers potential to store carbon. I think one of the issues, so increasingly brash is being removed from site for wood fuel, and so a lot of there's a market for the brash even for wood fuel basically, and as you said yourself, oh, sorry, I've just lost my train of thought, but locking it up in char into char, is that what opportunities are there? Sorry, you mentioned price of timber. Timber's really buoyant and has been pretty much since 2015. So even the what traditionally was really low value, the ends at the tops of the trees is attracting good prices. So economically, how do we get it to make sense? And then the other question, so char, I would imagine, improve soil structure. The argument against removal of brash is that it can support developing soil structure and putting nutrients into the soil. The flip side of that with large-scale Sitka clear fells, which we don't do so much of now in England and Scotland as well, actually in the UK, is that you can get a pulse of nutrient enrichment into watercourses. So if you haven't got a lot of the older plantations don't have significant buffers, we're now increasingly through woodland standards and certification, we want buffers along the riparian corridors. So that will become less of an issue and is increasing less of an issue. But so there is an argument around keeping biological matter on woody debris on site for habitat. And some of those, particularly in Kielder, some of those Sitka plantations don't have enough biodiversity in them. So there might be a little that I'm just trying to foresee some of the challenges Kevin might raise with you.
Yeah, because
I think in principle,
they have a failed heating system there as well, which actually, I mean, there is a German unit now that you can put in, so biochar becomes the byproduct of a heating system, which is better than the failed system they have in Kielder Village. So there is some good stuff, but also, I mean, for me, I use it in growing food, so it's actually about the way it holds water, stores nutrients. And I just thought, with wind erosion on larger sites, the loss of soil, the water running off the hills quickly, to me, it seems that biochar could possibly be a biological way. I mean, if brash was going to be left, which obviously we're also worrying with fire risk more these days as well. So I don't know if it's worth having a conversation with yourself as well at some point, or how that would work.
I don't know where you're based, Mark, but I'd love to have a conversation with you. If you put your email in the comments, or I can do likewise. We can pick it up and have a chat soon. But we're a small island with a huge population, so there's great pressure on land, and I think for me, the three pillars of sustainability are economy, environment, social. So society. So where you can hit economy and environment and society and deliver against all those is just fantastic, especially on a small island like ours. So if we can close the circle, so I mean, our broadleaf woodland management, we're not even managing half of our broadleaf woodlands. A lot of our ancient semi-natural woodlands are pretty much single species monocultures because of the way they were managed previously through history up until they were last cut about, I don't know, 180 years ago. But can we turn that full circle? Can we manage those woodlands for biodiversity gains? Biodiversity thrives when you've got spatial heterogeneity. So if you look into a lot of our oak woods, they are single age class. You've got single age class monocultures in effect. If we break up those structures, turn some of that stuff into char, and how can we generate markets? Can we think more widely around that, generate markets? And again, on softwood plantations, are we using that land to the best?
Well, hardwood is my main experience. I am restarting a coppice, which is under single-aged oak in the Tyne Valley. We just had 250 oaks taken out, and there's hardly any regen, so we're busy trying to do that and opening up coppice there as well. But to be honest, it's predominantly voluntary. We make charcoal, our best prices for restaurants, and then the brushwood's going into biochar. So yeah, I'll put my email in there. I'm on Hadrian's Wall, basically.
That would be great. Yeah, if you could do that, Mark, that'd be lovely. I think, Andy, do you have a question that you were wanting to ask?
I do have a question, yeah, which was, I think, for Joe or Chris, and that is, what is the role of natural regeneration and rewilding in increasing woodland cover and flood prevention? And more importantly, how easy would it be to get support for that? I mean, I know obviously payment systems are changing, but is it as easy to recognise in the system because you're kind of almost not doing anything?
I don't know who wants to take that one. James, Chris?
Sorry, I was busy typing.
You were typing, weren't you, James?
Chris, help.
Yeah, no, okay. Sorry, I was muted then. I started to talk. Well, I mean, the mechanisms for rewilding are, rewilding is a term that we've given to a different form of using land.
Yeah.
And if there's a process in place, isn't there? So it's not a thing. Rewilding is a process.
Sure.
Of stopping doing one thing and maybe doing some other things.
Yeah. And
so you can get payments to do those things that sit on that process of rewilding. If a landowner just stops intervening in some land under the current system, they would lose their basic payments, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Because it would become ineligible features.
Yeah.
Within ELMS, there is certainly going to be a bunch of actions that are basically around, for want of other words, rewilding. So naturally allowing unintervention or habitat without intervention, so that however you want to phrase it, however it will end up, there will be an area-based payment that will give landowners the choice of just allowing land to do its own thing. If at one level, there'll be a whole spectrum of things in between that might also be classed as part of the rewilding process.
Yeah.
So the beavers being a good example, where they will attract payments, but it won't be the beavers themselves. It's for allowing a stream corridor or creating a buffer area that will flood out or be wetted. So it would depend how creative people become when they're.
I think that's a really fantastic step forward.
Thanks, Chris. I think Andy L above you had a question as well just before, and then I'll come on to you, Heather. Andy, do you still have a question?
Yes, thanks for two very interesting presentations. A specific question to Chris about leaky dams. You had one strap line that said about leaky dams that said, "Go big or go home." Can you expand a little bit on that, please? Yeah.
So I quite often see leaky dams being built which are too small, and the reason I say they're too small is we know that research carried out in the New Forest and now lots of other kind of pieces of work. If we want stable structures, and sometimes bear in mind we might add wood into streams deliberately so it can move around. So setting that aside for one moment.
Is Chris frozen?
Chris has frozen.
Has he gone? Is it just me that can see him not moving
so,
a little bit? Should we see if he comes back to us? And I mean, certainly our experience of installing leaky dams at the Lune Rivers Trust is that bigger is better. I've seen a lot of dams installed where it's a wonderful thing. They're doing a small amount of work, but the larger the structure, the better, plus the greater resilience. I know, Rod, you're the expert on the hugely massive go big or go small dam, aren't you? I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, you know, the most effective things are where you can really see where there's enough space to hold the water back.
Yeah.
I mean, in the woodland, I often wonder if, you know, I'm putting in quite a few check dams, small check dams, and you often think, actually, when you've got them all together, how much effect are they really going to have? And if they've all got the same amount of gap at the bottom, do they actually, how long is that holding back period? In a way, to me, we would need to be holding back for hours rather than minutes.
Yeah, it's the drain down rate, isn't it? You need it to be significant enough and a long enough hold back for it to have an impact where you need it to be.
Yeah.
So I mean, yes, I mean, and we have done, you know, large multiple numbers of much smaller dams which are effective, but certainly the bigger the better in our experience. But then you with doing that, you do need to give some consideration to the area that you're looking at and where, you know, what the downstream impact is going to be if a tree trunk suddenly starts floating downstream. You know, you do need to look at some risk assessing with bigger. So yeah, does that answer your question, Andy? I don't know whether we've lost Chris, but yeah. Heather, did you have a question?
Yes, so I'm in Sheffield and manage a woodland, a 32-acre woodland, and it's the upper reaches of the Don, and as we know,
lovely.
Masses of flooding in Fish Lake and Doncaster. So I'm working with the Don Valley Catchment Trust, so that's about leaky dams and spilings as well for the gullies.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in beavers. And there's a whole woodland corridor, the Moss Valley Woodland Corridor, and there's different ownerships, Wildlife Trust, Woodland Trust, private owners. And how would we go about thinking about beavers? Where would we...
Sorry.
Hey, Chris.
My connection timed out. I'd been online for 12 hours.
So what, you know, I've been up to Scotland and I know there's, you know, I've looked at the beaver project there, one of the beaver projects, and that's a large loch, really.
It is, yeah. It's a huge project, isn't it? Massive scale.
Yeah, not a cent. Can't remember what it's called now. But so we've got small streams, really. It's the River Moss. How you know, what can anybody tell me what we need? You know, what's needed for a beaver introduction? Because instead of doing all these leaky dams and spilings and whatever, you know,
get them to do the work for you, Heather. That's what I reckon.
So, can anybody give any guidance on the kind of size of rivers and streams that are needed?
James, are you the beaver expert?
Yeah, I've been involved in Knapdale. Oh wow, 15 odd more years ago, and I was up on the Tay with the folks up there who are behind a lot of the beaver release work up there. But can I just pick on three things? I think before Chris got cut off, we were looking at the leaky dam question and go big or go home, and Chris can probably put me straight, but my understanding is if you've got small dams in and they're not well secured, then they get blown out quite quickly. And like you said, Louisa, I think bigger dams more resilient, last longer, greater volume of storage. On the beavers, I've mixed feelings. I think for biodiversity, yes, great, let's get them in, but let's remember that actually a lot of farmers really don't want them. And there's anglers have some challenges with them as well. And we can't, I know Derek Gow and I know Roisin, the folks who probably the leads in it. And I think if we ignore, like Chris was saying, you've got to listen to communities, and those stakeholders are and the farmers are the biggest, because otherwise you get polarization, and then people dig their heels in, and it got quite difficult on Tayside. They were literally being shot by the dozen, and they still are actually under license now. So there are a lot of challenges around there, and I think as well with beavers, it's really easy to think a lot of the beaver advocates will say, "Oh, beavers are great for natural flood management." I think a lot of that stuff's based on one study from, I think it's from the West Country, and in my experience of NFM, if the looking at beaver dams, they don't create a great deal of freeboard. I was up on Tayside and it was drought conditions, and their dams were absolutely up to the brim with water. There was maybe 5 or 10 centimeters of freeboard available for floodwater storage. So if you aren't necessarily creating a lot of water storage with beaver dams, however, you are creating a lot of hydraulic roughness in the catchment. And that also hinges, again, when we come back to stakeholder buy-in and working with the communities, the farming community, they, it's up to them whether they want to tolerate the debris and the, well, for want of a better word, or the felled trees and things that beavers want to create. I'd argue actually that a lot of our riparian zones, a lot of our rivers don't have enough trees on them to sustain, well, they might have enough to sustain beavers in terms of food, but really I would argue, first of all, let's get a lot more trees on our riverbanks. And I think Chris had a cracking slide about some work, which I'm really fascinated in, and I haven't seen, I'd love to see more of it, around 3D buffers. And but I've also seen similar work or similar statements around if we had 30-meter buffer zones, either side, buffer strips of woods and shrubs and trees, either side of our rivers, we would fix a lot of our Water Framework Directive challenges around water quality. A lot of stuff, whether it's herbicides or whatever else, just simply wouldn't hit the water, hit the rivers. So yeah, let's get some more trees along our rivers to sustain those beaver populations. Let's work with landowners so they'll tolerate them. But in terms of practicalities of what you want in your catchment, which I think was a crux of your question, Heather, you need stuff for the habitat for them, and the wildlife trusts. I'm familiar with the folks in Cumbria. They're supporting beaver reintroductions now. There's lots of folks who can help you put the building blocks in place. You mentioned the Woodland Trust. I imagine they might be fairly open-minded about having beaver in some of their woodlands. You might have a few hurdles to get through getting enough people on board. But yes, Derek Gow, if you Google Derek Gow, I think he's fairly easy to make contact with. And Roisin Palmer, double barrel name, I'm afraid I forget it, but she's based out of Edinburgh Zoo, and they will practically support you. I think they're pretty busy there.
I didn't hear the start of your question, Heather, but there's a farmer called Chris Jones who's running the Beaver Trust down in Cornwall, and he basically says start planting willow and aspen. Willow and aspen.
Yeah.
Get ready for beavers in 20 years' time by planting willow and aspen. and James is right. Chris also says if we had a 20-30 meter buffer, that would probably deal with most of the management conflict that we have. And I think from looking at the Scottish experience and looking at the German experience, the conflicts come from the lack of a good management system, and I think that's the advice that's come down from Scotland. Get the management system in place first before you get a bigger population of beavers, because the reality is, with the decision that the ministers made a few months ago, they are now endemic. So the river otter population will be allowed to stay, which means they will eventually find their way to you.
Okay.
Can I ask? Oh, sorry, Heather.
That's very helpful. Can I just follow up about for Chris, really, like for the Don, is there a plan for lower down on, near Doncaster and Fish Lake, where it's a lot of pretty barren agricultural land with enormous flooding? You know, is there any plan there for water holding back, or?
I don't know the specifics, Heather. I know that there's the Don got awarded quite a large amount of money to do what they're calling a catchment to sea natural flood management project. And are you based around there, Heather? Are you
Sheffield?
based in,
it would be worth
Sheffield?
asking. I would, I would check with the Rivers Trust, because they will be, if it's most likely, I think that they are doing the source to sea NFM
That's
project.
what it's called,
that will be, I think it's source to sea. It's a European funded project, and that will be the Don Rivers Trust. If you speak to them, they'll be able to give you greater information about how that's being rolled out.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I was just going to ask a very, very quick.
I think we've got time just for a couple
is
of
the
very
30 metre
quickie.
buffer on both sides of the river?
Chris Jones says 20, but yes, it's on both sides of the river, Andy.
So you're looking at 60 metre. Thanks.
20 metre is what Chris Jones is asking for from the Beaver Trust.
Okay.
Rod, did you have a quick question before we close?
With the how strong a force of river can beavers deal with? We have a sort of quite a strong flash flood where it can come up sort of 1.5 meters in an hour and a half. Can they cope with that sort of thing?
I don't know. Yeah, they do suffer from being washed out. I was
going to say also, and this might just be my naivety, but my understanding is that beavers don't like a leaky dam. Beavers like their dams to be completely blocked with no holes in them whatsoever. Did you tell me that, James? Maybe. So no. So
don't know if I told you that, but I think you're absolutely right.
But they don't like the noise of it being leaky, so they plug it. And part of the challenge with that is that if the dam isn't, if you've just got a dam that's permanently in situ and it's not draining down, it's not actually generating the benefits that you want from a natural flood management point of view. So
I just want to point out that large parts of the country, hydraulic roughness is more important than attenuation and storage. So I know where you are in the north, in Lune, storage is an important hydrological mechanism. But where I did my work,
hills,
infiltration and particularly James showed a karstic limestone area in Cumbria. Infiltration is much more of an important factor.
I think it's something that we sometimes overlook here. If I'm being honest, it's been really interesting to have that because I know it, but it's not always my first thought. I kind of default to a leaky dam before I think about hydraulic roughness and trying to look at that as
thinking about what the leaky dam is there to do, and it does store some water, but equally it is there to spread the water out. So it's more shallow to increase infiltration. Yeah.
But Chris, how does that work when you've got when you're in the depths of winter and you've got two months of absolutely saturated waterlogged soils?
Well, so waterlogged soils, saturated soils are still infiltrating water. They're just doing it at a rate equal to the rate it's coming onto it. So it's not, if you pour a bucket of water onto dry soil, it disappears. But if you pour a bucket of water onto what we call saturated soils, it will still disappear, just at a slower rate. So it's not, you work with the geology you have, but it's just important not to fall into generalizations about what different structures are primarily designed to do, because
absolutely.
Britain is a complex geological place.
Can I just pick?
And it can be misleading to think that every structure provides the same hydrological function in every sort of geology and every sort of environment.
Yeah.
So,
can I pick up on the point around water storage behind beaver dams and behind leaky structures? That's the issue. That the beavers want that water held, and that is where the challenge with the angling community comes about, because salmonids want to run rivers, and if you're putting a structure in the headwaters and there's spawning for the sea trout and the migratory and the salmon, then there are some headaches potentially that I haven't seen answered well by the beaver advocates.
There's a lot of work in the States with the salmon, and they're saying that the salmon are much happier with the beavers. I've just been on a sort of a week course linked to Utah University, and they were saying every time that the fish are improved by the beavers.
They don't eat fish, do they, Rod? They're not fish eaters.
No,
they're vegetarians.
They're improved by getting the diversity of the habitat and the feed for all the fish.
Yeah, I think the biggest issues for salmon is for us are not availability of spawning habitat.
It's passage, isn't it?
Well, and problem it's multifactorial. It's challenges at sea and all sorts.
Yeah. Do we have? So, Andy, do you have a quick comment before? I think I'm just looking at.
Louisa, I was just aware that I didn't quite. I got cut off halfway through that guy's question. I was a bit.
Andy was asking about go big or go small, and I think we kind of.
Louisa, you gave a great answer.
I gave a great answer.
Okay.
Which is surprising, isn't it?
Sorry, I was frantically looking.
Those who know me, I did. So, any last questions from anybody?
Well, I was just going to go back to the infiltration point. I mean, a colleague of mine, Niels Caulfield, does a lot of work around soil, and in the sort of a lot of the flooding that was happening in the winter last year, it's going around and getting spade out and seeing what was going on, and you had an inch or two of very wet and then just dry.
Yeah.
And it just isn't actually infiltrating. And I think we could transform the flooding with a transformation in soil management. And I'm absolutely in favour of increasing tree cover 100%. But I'm in favour of increasing it substantially, is what I mean. But I think the soil management would make your job in the Environment Agency so much easier. If we just got more organic matter into the soil and had better infiltration through either keyline ploughing or just things like chicory, actually encouraging farmers to use deeper rooting plants would in itself make quite a big difference. So,
it's a very interesting point, Andy, and it's something I've definitely taken that away from this session. I think the challenge that sometimes we have as a Rivers Trust is that when we're looking at natural flood management, we default to things like dams and tree planting bankside, because we are a Rivers Trust and it's multi-benefit, but it's got a direct impact on the river that's not just flooding. And so, although we've got some sward lifting that we're looking to do to improve land penetration, to reduce flooding as a small part of some work that we're looking at doing, it doesn't really fall under our core. In terms of funding, and we're very project driven, it's not really something that we go after funding for because it doesn't have a direct river benefit often, or it's harder to demonstrate. So it'd be quite interesting to see if that, from a trust point of view, we could make greater links about improving, even if it was based on water quality or but yeah, very interesting.
A key part of it will be getting the fungal element and the real diversity of the soil. To me, that helps really build the carbon there, and the fungal elements allow the water to move in the soil.
It's just hard. I mean, as I was trying to get over, it's hard because flood funding isn't generally used for changing soil management.
No,
it's very hard to make the case.
It is. So I know when if I'm putting a slow the flow bid in to the Environment Agency and I'm trying to make a case for doing some work, I did get a small element of funding for soil improvement, but I had to argue the toss for hours and I couldn't demonstrate. It was difficult, whereas my leaky dams, attenuation ponds were much easier to quantify, but maybe that's something that will come in time.
Can I comment, Louisa? Is that?
Please do, Joe.
A very interesting discussion around natural flood risk management. I mean, from my experience, it's I just have concern about partitioning off particular aspects. I mean, the discussion now is it relates to the importance of integrating some of these challenges. But I think one of the problems with flood risk management, it was alluded to there, is that it tends to sit in a silo. There is a continuum here, particularly in the context of climate change, between flooding and drought. And it's very much the challenge of water resource management, either too much water or not enough. And it would be good to consider how these approaches to natural flood risk management can be integrated with issues around broader water quality and resource management, and there's some discussion of that. The challenge into the future is going to be to get the incentives lined up that will recognize these relationships, again, instead of a partition response. And the key issue around soil management, the biggest challenge in Britain is compaction of soils.
Yeah.
And it's been a major issue for many years, and many of my colleagues at Silso 30 years ago were having courses with farmers addressing compaction. And it was very much then focused on the agricultural implications of compaction. And now, of course, many of these things have a much broader interest. I had one quick question, actually, which to Chris was, have you been looking, and others have been looking at the implications of Brexit, the withdrawal of the BPS, the basic payment scheme, on the viability of farms, particularly in the uplands, and how they might be disposed positively or negatively to some of these interventions and elms? Because a lot of these upland farms are going to be really at risk into the future when the income support is withdrawn. And I'm not sure whether that's good for natural flood risk management or bad for it. I don't know whether you have
to tell the truth, it's a bit, it's you know, there's only so many hours in a day to work on particular topics, and looking at the social and economic implications is a bit much. I mean, but I do agree with you. I think if we get withdrawal of farming in some of those harder areas, I don't necessarily think that will be a great thing. I've been trying to promote what we might call the black mirror of elms, which is that if particularly in some areas where farmers decide they're going to just give up on public subsidy altogether and go hell for leather commercial production, if you get that, you know, in areas with rapid response catchments or where we've already got compaction, then you could actually see a significant worsening of flood risk in some areas which have already benefited, say, from multi-million pound schemes, because the additional intensification could produce a significant hydrological change. So there's certainly some bad sides to the reduction in BPS that I think we've yet to see, because of course we don't know. It's all theory, isn't it? At the minute it's economic modelling about how landowners will react, whether land will increase or decrease in price, whether it will be abandoned or farmed more intensively. So I'm aware of it, Joe, but I've not specialised in the research or the topic.
Yeah, thanks.
Fantastic. So any final comments, questions? I think we're probably a little over time. So if everybody's okay, if I wrap us up. So I'd just like to say a really big thank you to James and to Chris. That's been really informative. Thanks, Andy, for being our technical support as well. That's been really helpful for me. But that's been really useful. I've taken huge amounts away from that. I hope that's been useful for everybody else that's attended. So lovely to see and meet you all, and thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for asking me to talk. Yeah.
Thanks for having us. Yeah.
Thank you.